Hello, great souls. Welcome to our Monday satsang, living yoga talk. Let's begin together with a prayer. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, and Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, we humbly bow to you all. Guide us in our journey of remembering our own divine nature. Help us to dive deeply into these yogic teachings, to feel thy living presence with us as we study and practice and journey back to our own divine truth of being one with thee. Om, peace. Amen. Okay, so we are making our way through the Yamas and Niyamas, beginning with the Yamas. Last week we talked about non-harming, and today we're looking at the second Yama, which is non-lying or truthfulness, Satya. So I thought I would talk a little bit about what Swamiji says in Raja Yoga about the Yamas and the practice of the Yamas, and this particular Yama of non-lying. So one of the things that Swamiji says about the practice is that the Yamas and Niyamas, practicing them, is the essential purpose is to permit the milk of inner peace to be gathered in the pail of the mind by plugging holes that have been caused by restless, wrong attachments, desires, and various forms of inharmonious living. When we remove our delusions, we cannot help but be benevolent, truthful, respectful of others' property, etc., because it is our nature to be good. We act otherwise, not because it is natural for us to do so, but because we have embraced an unnatural state of egotistical inharmony. So when we're looking at the Yamas and Niyamas, it's important for us to keep in mind they are guiding us back. They are a system of support for our thoughts, our actions, our behaviors that guide us back to our divine nature. And it's helpful to be remembering them in that way so that they don't become a sense of should. Oh, I should do that. I know I'd be good if I did that. When we hold them in that way, we are affirming that we aren't good already. And that's why we want to be, very careful about they are here to support us experiencing the divine truth of who we really are. So looking at truth and looking at this Yama, one of the things that we look at, and I'm reading, by the way, from our the Art and Science of Raja Yoga. So beautiful explanation and articulation of the Yamas and Niyamas in Raja Yoga. A little plug for that is the course will be starting in, I think it's the end of August is the first class. It might be, end of August. So if you're at all curious, I highly recommend the course. So with non-lying, when I was preparing today, this is what I started to say is, in Raja Yoga, one of the things that Swami talks about is the importance of us understanding the principle and the practice on a subtle level. So it's not just the obvious and the subtlety of non-lying. So I'll talk about both. I'll talk about the obvious and then the subtle. So obvious is knowing that what you are saying is untrue, right? And I was reminded today about an experience I had in my early 20s. I was looking for a job, and I was and anyway, I went to this store that I frequented as a customer. And I loved it. I loved the store. I loved the items. It was for tall women, so it was perfect for me. And I went in, and I guess it doesn't really matter all that much, but it was a manager position, and it suited me for my lifestyle at that moment. It seemed like it. So I went in for the interview, and it went beautifully. Like, it could not have really gone any better. And the more that the manager, the woman who owned the store, was talking to me, the more we felt like, wow, this is a perfect fit. And then her very last question to me was, would I be comfortable selling someone an item, recommending to them that they purchase 2 of the same item when I knew they only needed 1? And it shocked me. I just, I was all on board until she said that, and I paused and I said, well, I would be comfortable selling them something I knew they needed, right? That would be easy for me to do. And she said, no, if you knew they did not need it, would you be comfortable basically convincing them? And she probably didn't say basically, she probably said convincing them that they do need it. And I froze. I didn't know what to say. It became completely awkward for both of us. She had a demeanor, she got a little intense, but then uncomfortable. And basically the interview pretty much ended after that. I just felt so dejected in myself about this had seemed like the perfect fit in my life at that time. And it wasn't. Because in order to do that job, I would have to commit to being dishonest. I would have to pretend that I thought someone needed something when I was certain they didn't, and convince them of that. And I couldn't do it. And I had this moment of feeling, I really did feel a sense of grief, a sense of bereft. How come this plan didn't work? It seemed like a perfect plan. And also what I want to say, and the reason I'm talking about it, is why would we lie? Because in one sense you think it's obvious. Non-lying, be truthful, right? Honesty is the best policy. I think for many of us, we feel that way. Not everyone does, but many would say, and I've heard talks on this, that people often think of themselves as honest. They don't realize that they aren't. And then there are situations in which we get pushed on it, right? We get pushed. And so I remember listening to a man who was giving a spiritual talk. I don't remember what path he followed. He was an inspiring speaker, and he was talking about for himself with work and employment, because this is where it can get pushed for us. When we feel we need something financially. And he was saying for himself, part of his faith journey was to recognize that any door he had to walk through that compromised his faith was not the right door for him. And I loved that. I just loved the beauty of that clarity and that simplicity. And he was also saying it takes a lot of strength to trust in spiritual principles. It does take a lot of strength to believe, as we say in the Gita, in the allegory of the Gita, Krishna driving the chariot, and that is following the Yamas and Niyamas, is following Dharma, is following divine principle, is following spiritual teachings. And committing to that and believing where there is Dharma, there is victory. And that victory may not be obvious externally. It may not be obvious externally. And that day I lost a job. I had it up until the very last question. And then I couldn't give the answer that she wanted, needed, required. And I actually couldn't shop there anymore. So I think I was sad about that. I just couldn't go back. I was so tainted for me that, wow, this whole business is run on dishonesty. So the product, however good it seemed, it's not the same. And that felt like a loss in my life. It was, in fact, a victory. It was a victory. And that proved true, not only in the external events of my life. Other jobs came. It all did work out. But more importantly, there was an inner strength, an inner character that was being developed, spiritual maturity, that in the face of challenge, I could stand in the truth. And I could feel at the same time that there was a sense of grief and loss, there was also an inner feeling of strength. I could feel that. I had no doubt about it. I was sad, but I knew that my soul had been well served in that moment. And I was practicing trusting the divine plan, trusting that, okay, God, I'm not sure what you have in store for me, but for some reason this isn't it, because it's a doorway I can't walk through with my spiritual life intact. And I have found that to be such a beautiful, perfect way of helping me make decisions. Having the Yamas and Niyamas as guidelines. And you know, some decisions, really, it's not easy to tell. Should I do this? Shouldn't I do that? Swamiji said there's a number of decisions in our life that are neutral. They're fairly neutral. It doesn't really matter which ones we choose. But when it comes to the Yamas and Niyamas, that's not neutral. So making a decision that that supports the living of these is, I have found it to be very helpful. And the same is true in relationships and friendships. So I remember, again, it's interesting today, different work environments came to mind, where jobs that were in many ways good, positive, right? But this was my journey through my 20s in particular, where I would encounter situations that challenged me spiritually. And I'd find myself standing in the principle and feeling a certain sense of loss, disappointment about it not lining up with others who were in my life who didn't stand in those same principles. People who I felt were good people generally. But I'm thinking of a friend now, again, at same age, time frame, but age is irrelevant here because can happen at any age. She had been out with a boyfriend, they'd been shopping, and they got they purchased a lot of things, and one of the things they purchased were some very expensive skis. And when the whole order was rung up, the skis were not included. And he knew it at the time. He could tell, because I guess he'd already factored in what the price should be. And he very quietly was thinking, this is great news, right? So they ring up the bill, they go out to the car, and he tells her, and she thinks it's great news. So the next day she comes to work and tells me this wonderful news. It was so awkward. I kind of found myself not quite knowing what to say, and that made her feel uncomfortable, and she tried to say more about why it's good news, and it just was awkward. The best I can tell you. And I was reading from Swamiji's book, Demystifying Patanjali, and he also talks about the Yoga Sutras here and the Yamas and Niyamas. And one of the things that Swamiji says in this book is when it comes to truthfulness, sometimes the best option is silence. And you know, in both of the stories it turns out I'm sharing, that's where I landed in both times. I felt very awkward and uncomfortable, and I couldn't agree. I could not verbally agree, and I felt a lot of pressure to agree, but I couldn't. So I fell silent, and in my silence I communicated my perspective. I wasn't trying to. I was really, if I could have gotten out of either one of those, I would have. But I really feel that, you know, that was part of my growing up. And part of the growing up was choosing with consciousness my company. When I look at my life today, and I'm very grateful for this, it is filled with people who follow the Yamas and Niyamas in a dedicated way. They inspire me every day, the people that I live with, the people that I serve with. I am immersed in this. We just had a beautiful celebration for Yogananda's 100th. If you missed it, I highly recommend it. And I know it's going to be posted. Some I think is on Facebook, but look for it. It's worth looking for. That day, I was amazed. I was glued. It was all virtual because it needs to be right now. And every segment was a immersion in the teachings and in the practices and the individuals speaking on this. I was telling Tandava today how much I enjoyed his talk on music. And I did and I do. And what happens for me in this company of truth seekers, and that's what satsang means, is it's much easier for me to not only follow the teachings, but be inspired to follow them. I'm in a community of friends that are not challenging me at every step to, lighten up a little bit. And that was the challenge I used to get. I used to encounter that, does it really matter? Or people feeling uncomfortable because they didn't even want to look at it. So this is the obvious, right? Now the subtle practice of truthfulness in looking at our own life and delusion is, am I being honest with myself about my life? Am I being honest with myself about the circumstances I'm in? Am I being honest with myself about my choices? So one of the ways this can happen, I was talking with Shanti earlier, and she was just sharing, the power of delusion. And, she was remembering earlier on in her life and sharing with me how she could rationalize behavior. And she could create whatever story she needed to say, this is okay. And the two of us were just talking about the importance when you're following the Yamas and Niyamas of having teachers in your life, having friends, sincere friends who can help you to know if you really are following them. Are you being honest with yourself? I remember a dear friend in high school. I was dating. This was just after high school. I was dating a young man, just a couple of years older than me. It was not a good relationship. It was not a good relationship. And this friend, I had been at a gathering, and he was giving me a ride home. And boy, I think this must have taken so much courage on his part. We rode in silence. And when we got to my house, he very sincerely said, I'd like to ask you a question. And I could feel that, there was some real depth here. And I said, okay. And he just said, I'm concerned about you in this relationship. You don't seem happy. You don't seem as happy as I know you to be. It was true. It was really true. And I'll tell you, it was a hard truth to face for me. And that, the divine timing of that was that I had just had an interaction with that boyfriend, which might be why he wasn't giving me a ride home. My other friend was, that was really pressing on me. What are you doing? What are you doing in this? I wanted it to work. It was for me a realization that you can love someone who's wrong for you. I didn't think that was possible. I thought, well, if you love someone, then that's all that's needed and anything can be worked out. That was not my experience. It was not. Like, nope, that's not true. That's not true. We were not a good match. We were not a good fit. And it was really hard for me to face that truth. And boy, am I grateful, sincerely, that I did face it. It was hard again. It felt like a loss, right? And I had to offer up to God and the universe. I surrendered and let that go. I did end the relationship. And Yeah, and what's interesting is when I would pray, there was a long gap before that in my meeting my husband, James, who I have no words for how grateful I am for that soul partnership. There was a long gap in there. And whenever I prayed, what the inner guidance I received it outwardly too with mentors and friends, was be true to yourself. Right? The way to attract a soul partner is be authentic and be true, which really meant be deeply spiritual. And again, in my life, with people who certainly, all very good people, but they were not dedicated to finding God. And so I could feel this certain sense of it was my ego, I'm sure, don't be too spiritual because then you won't find a mate. Asha tells a story of a young college student who said that to her, that she was concerned if she was too dedicated, she'd never find a partner. Well, I had to make a decision that was hard to make, which was I want a partner deeply. God knew that. And but it would have to be a partner that would support my spiritual life. It would have to be. There just couldn't work any other way. And that was true for day one with James. Right? So, but what it required first of me was to be truthful about who I am. And what I found in the growing of this practice was what we would call jnana yoga, which is to look dispassionately at circumstances and look for the truth in them. And I was very good at imposing what I wanted something to be. So I imposed on people and situations something that wasn't true about them. It just wasn't true. I had a group of, I was trying to discern, after James and I moved here, being connected with a group that was extension of family, and I couldn't. James was very clear. He knew this is our spiritual family. This is where we need to give our energy. Of course, we need to choose this now. His parents had passed, and we felt dharmically and karmically we had completed what we had needed to do that was right there. And then the relationships could be more distant. And I was having a hard time because I was feeling a certain sense of being asked to be connected and involved. And Asha, I went and spoke to Asha about it. And she said to me very directly, they have no interest in you. And yeah, as Asha can be, which I appreciated, right? And then she said, not what you're offering, right? Like, I'm sure they are inviting you and they feel like they'd like you to be part of it, but what your life is about, that's not what their life is about. Which is true, right? And so again, there can be love, absolutely love. It has nothing to do with not loving someone. It's asking the deeper question of, is this a good choice for my spiritual life? And one of the things in the Gita that Krishna says is a higher dharma will resolve a lesser dharma. So, for me, relationships and family, one of the trickiest ones to shouldn't I be more involved, can come up for me very, very easily. And when it's quite clear, including when one of my teachers is telling me, you must protect your spiritual life. And what can happen for me in certain settings is I get drawn in a way, and I give energy and I give support in a way that my own divine guidance says isn't needed. It might be wanted, but it is not needed. There are others who can give that support. I don't need to give it. And more importantly, it takes me away from where the energy I have to offer is needed. And this is our life, right? James and I are sevakas. We're dedicated to this life. I'm grateful to be dedicated. There are choices that are a part of it. They're not easy choices. And that's what I was appreciating and talking to Shanti when she was saying for herself, and we were just just reminding me, as talking about the Yamas and Niyamas with her, that it's a good idea to have guidance and support when we're making these decisions. And what I have found with each one of the Yamas and Niyamas is the more I practice them, the more skillful I become at them, right? At practicing them. And I will receive support and feedback and inspiration by cultivating a community of support. And then also I will say, I have absolutely felt God's God and Guru's presence in helping me. So we're not lost out there in trying to navigate this. The right friend, the right teacher, the right book, and the right moment does appear if I'm sincere in my search. It was a godsend that manager asked me that question, because I was so clear I had the job and I wanted it and she wanted me, right? We were like, yay, this is working. Had she not asked me that question when it was a fundamental policy and foundation of her business, what a sticky mess we would have gotten into. I'm just certain of it today. I can say, how could it not have come up in other ways, right? And I was saved. I was spared by that question. Maybe she asked it of everybody. I don't know. But it did seem odd. We'd gone through everything and then, okay, one more question I have for you. And I'm so grateful for the question. I was asking Tandava earlier, I was remembering this title of a movie by Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth, right? And it felt like an inconvenient question. The truth can feel inconvenient, right? Because now what? Oh, now the plan has to go differently. I remember meeting an individual at a gathering with James, and there were a lot of reasons why this individual could have been a good teaching partner in the work that James and I had been doing. And after the gathering, I was saying to James, wasn't he a wonderful guy? I love James because he just helps me so much. He was just completely neutral, like, I guess so. And I said, didn't you think he was whatever I thought he was? He was like, not really, right? He had no delusion about this person. So I was confused. I thought, wow, I think he's great. Maybe we could work together. He's like, maybe. So at the end that night, my practice of introspection, meditation, sadhana, I'm practicing my sadhana by myself, having my, and I can't remember if this was right before meditation or after meditation, I don't know, but I was praying, giving thanks for the day. That person came to mind. I was offering gratitude for meeting that person, and I felt a sinking, I would say I felt the truth. I felt the truth. Like, oh, I had created a whole story about who they were and how great it would be for us to work together. And in the moment of that inner silence, it was very clear to me, maybe James read this accurately. And it proved to be true. Again, the person, not a terrible person by any means, but he was not in the same spiritual alignment. We were not spiritually aligned. And later, that played itself out. We never did. It just played itself out in a fine way. No big conflict, no big problem. But it kept me from pursuing something that would have not been a good thing to pursue. So there we have non-lying, Satya, truthfulness. And my invitation to you this week is listen to your life. Invite God in and invite this practice of truthfulness. It is said, the truth will set you free. Right? This is a very, very deep practice. So practice it, and see what happens for you. See if there is your own experience of illumination and gift in the truth. It might seem inconvenient. I have become profoundly grateful for every truth I've perceived. So may this also be so for you, great souls. Many, many blessings to you.